Tucking south in the deep oceans were a long remain a laboratories and times consumer tech and acknowledge undersea topography largest considerably behind the Aquatics with the landscapes and the near side of the moon over the years methods were improved. Topography, the south deep sea learn remain laborious and times consuming text knowledge undersea large under behind aquatic with taking sounding in deep sea words and long remain laborious and times consuming text and acknowledge undersea topography lies considerably behind our acquaintance with the landscape of near sides of the moon over the years methods were improved. The principle of cooperation is one of the things that sets conversations apart from similar activities such as lecture, debates, arguments, and meetings. Other qualities will help to define conversation include the equal distribution of the speakers, right, mutual respect among speakers, spontaneity, and informality, and non-business environment, the principle of cooperation such as debate, lecture, meeting, and quality that will help to define conversation. The principle of cooperation is one of the things that sets conversation apart from similar activities such as lecture, debates, arguments, and meetings. Other qualities will help to define conversation include the equal distribution of speaker rights, mutual respect among speakers, spontaneity and informality, and non-business-like environment. An American executive, unlike the British, have no connection with the legislatures, and this lack of coordination between executive and legislature is one of the distinctive features of American federal government. The Constitution guarded against executive control, disqualifying federal officials, whether civil or military, from membership in Congress. Federal's lack of coordination distinctive feature. The American executives, unlike the British, have no connection with the legislature, and this lack of coordination between executive and legislature is one of the distinctive features of American federal government. The Constitution guarded against executive controls by disqualifying federal officials, whether civil or military, from membership in Congress. In the summer of 2006, you brought experience drought in the unprecedented on the height Europe visit waterway, the lowest water fork strip, the carries less cargo and make up the loss of revenue, which surged up to 50% in Italy. Agricultural Confederation announced that the reps harvest in the lowest in the 2 decades, unprecedented. In the summer of 2006, Europe experienced drought on the unprecedented scale. On the rise, Europe's busiest waterway, the lowest water fork strip, to carry lot cargo and make up for lost revenue, which surcharged up to 50% in Italy. Agricultural confederations announced that the rest harvests were the lowest in the 2 decades. The history of life on Earth is filled with the mystery, life and death, struggle, and bizarre plant and animals were amazing, and as any meteorological creature studying life's history is one of the most fascinating and challenges of biology and researchers. Life mysteries, struggle, bizarre plant, bizarre several ways to view. The history of life on Earth is filled with mystery, life and death struggles. Bizarre plants and animals are amazing as any mythological creatures. Studying life's history is one of the most fascinating and challenging parts of biology, and researchers go about it in several ways. Bluefoot are rare in nature. Food researchers say that when humans research for food, they learn to avoid toxic or spoiled objects, which were often blue, black, or purple. When food dyed blue, is served to study subjects, they lose appetite. Apathy. Bluefoot is rare in nature. Food researchers says that when humans search for food, they learned to avoid toxic or spoiled objects, which were often blue, black, or purple. When food dye blue is to study subjects, they lose appetite.
It is quite clear that rising prosperity does not make people feel more content.
Does not make people feel content.
This course will examine some of the profound ethical dilemmas.
This course examines some of the ethical dilemmas.
Fees are heavily discounted and bursaries are available for delegates.
3N are available for delegates.
Students are held accountable for adhering to established community standards.
Students have established its community standards.
This article covers the who, where and when of the conflict.
This is cover for who and when of the conflict.
Essays should be typed with double spacing on white paper.
Essays will be typed is a double space in white paper.
The medical centre is located near the supermarket on North Street.
It is near to supermarkets on the North Street.
The mismatch between the intended and reported uses of the instrument becomes clear.
The mismatch is become too clear.
New York City is famous for its ethnic diversity.
New York cities are famous as a multicultural city.
A periodical is a publication that is issued regularly.
Periodicals publicity is periodical. The picture showed a very interesting information about source of funding or for higher education in Scotland. Overall, there is significant difference in terms of source of funding or for higher education in Scotland. As we can see from the picture, we have the highest number in environment. Environment is about 1,000. The picture showed a very interesting information about source of funding or higher education in Scotland. Overall, there is a significant difference in terms of source of funding or higher education in Scotland. As we can see from the picture, we have endorsement, which is about 1,200, and then we have the second highest number in services, which is about 1,000 million. According to the picture, there may be a significant increase and dramatic decrease in the number in the future. According to the picture, there may be a significant increase and dramatic decrease in the number in the future. Retirement from maintained school by reason England, which is about premature, which is about 5,000, and then we have age, which is about 10,000. Retirement from. The picture showed very interesting information about retirement from the maintained school by recent inland. Overall, there is a significant difference in terms of retirement from maintained schools by regions inland. As we can see from the picture, we have the highest number in age, which is about 10,000 retirements, and then we have the second highest number in rematures, which is about 5,000. According to the picture, there may be a significant increase and dramatic decrease in the number in the future. According to the picture, there may be a significant increase and dramatic decrease in the number in the future. Proportions of trip made by Mott Sydney. Proportion of trip by Mott Sydney vehicle, which is about 72%, and then work only, which is about 17%. Proportion of trip made by Mott Sydney in 2004, vehicle 72%. The picture showed very interesting information about proportion of trips made by Mott Sydney 2004. Overall, there is significant difference in terms of proportion of trips made by Mott Sydney 2004. As we can see from the picture, we have the highest number in vehicle, which is about 72%, and then we have the second highest number in work only, which is about 17%. According to the picture, there may be a significant increase and dramatic decrease in the number in the future. According to the picture, there may be a significant increase and dramatic decrease in the number in the future. Increase in the number of variant over past year, increase in 1994, 40%, 1994, which is about 45,000, and then 76,000. The picture showed very interesting information about increase in the number of variants over past 10 years. Overall, there is a significant difference in terms of increase in the number of variants over past 10 years. As we can see from the picture, we have the highest number in 2004, which is about 76,000, and then we have the second highest number in 1994, which is about 45,000. According to the picture, there may be a significant increase and dramatic decrease in the number in the future. According to the picture, there may be a significant increase and dramatic decrease in the number in the future. Evolutions of success rates in Canada 2000 to 2003. In 2003, failure, which is about success is about 90%, and then we have the second number in failure, which is about 30%. The picture showed very interesting information about evolution of success rate in Canada 2000 to 2003. Overall, there is a significant difference in terms of evolution of success rate in Canada in 2000 to 2003. As we can see from the picture, we have the highest number in 2002 in success, which is about 90%, and then we have the second highest number in 2000 for failures, which is about 30%. According to the picture, there may be a significant increase and dramatic decrease in the number in the future. According to the picture, there may be a significant increase and dramatic decrease in the number in the future. Average class size in UK school, 2006, which is about 20%, and then we had the second 2020 and 2025. The picture showed very interesting information about average class size in UK school. Overall, there is significant difference in terms of average class size in the UK school. As we can see from the picture, we have the highest number in 2006, which is about 50%, and then we have the second highest number in 2005, which is about 30%. According to the picture, there may be a significant increase and dramatic decrease in the number in the future. According to the picture, there may be a significant increase and dramatic decrease in the number in the future.
The basis of all life on Earth is the cell. All creatures on Earth are made up of cells. I'm not going to dwell on the biology of cells much. It's not that relevant, but I do want to point out a few things. First of all, there are two sorts of cells. There's a thing called the prokaryotic cell, which is fairly simple, and it's the thing that all bacteria are made of. And then we have a eukaryotic cell, a much more complicated beast on the right, which didn't appear until well into the history of the biosphere on Earth. And there are many single-celled eukaryotes, but there are also, and importantly, multicellular organisms, and all of those are based on the eukaryotic cell.
The lectures give very interesting information about the cells in UK, and the lectures give very interesting information about the cells in UK, and then he talked about we have the completed appearance in history, and then he talked about the single cells, and then he talked about the important in cells in UK, and then he talked about we have completed an important cells, and then he talked about appearance in history, and then he talked about single cells, and then he talked about
Unemployment, lost productivity, and lost contributions to the community are typical and usually uncounted costs of homelessness, and they can be addressed with an integrated strategy. Integrated housing also addresses environmental and sustainability challenges. We incorporate green design principles to create healthier buildings for our residents and staff, limit emissions, and contain energy costs to preserve affordability and reduce the impact of our buildings on the environment. Integrated housing allows a whole community response and the opportunity for mutually beneficial public-private collaborations. Corporate investors match the contributions of government to pay for the acquisition and redevelopment of the Prince George. Corporate investors receive valuable tax credit and other benefits from the federal government and significant marketing benefits for their brand locally. Philanthropy supported the initial program and business planning for the project. Student architects from a local university designed and built an entry-floor art gallery for use by community arts organizations. Historic preservation groups assisted with the fundraising for the ballroom restoration. And the restored ballroom is a rental venue used by many organizations for events, training, fundraisers, and the rental proceeds benefit Common Ground's other supportive housing work, and the jobs created through the caterers are set aside, many of them for our tenants.
The lectures give very interesting information about the contribution, and then she talked about housing and education address, and then he talked about healthy building, and then she talked about reduced impact in the environment, and then she talked about public relations, government, and then she talked about significant marketing, and then she talked about business plans for the process, and then she talked about fundraising, organization, training, housing work, and then she talked about many of them doing the business plan.
But there's a plant, another dandelion relative, called Achillea, also known as yarrow. And in the Iliad, which is based on events that happened perhaps as much as 2000 BC, Achilles is mentioned as using this herb to heal the wounds of his warriors. So the use of medicinal plants certainly goes back that far. The Romans, of course, used medical herbs, including dandelions. By the time we got to the Middle Ages, dandelions were a well-established medical plant. They were something that was planted in virtually every monastery across Europe. All the many monasteries, the Benedictine monasteries, were havens of knowledge, of the classical knowledge of the ancient Greeks and Romans was kept alive in the monasteries. And monasteries, of course, they were where you would go if you were sick, because the monks were the people who knew the ways to use plants to cure people. So dandelions were a very common plant in monastery gardens. Dens leonis is medieval Latin for tooth of the lion. And of course, you can still buy dandelions off the shelf as a medicine to this day.
The lectures give a very interesting information about dandelion, and then she talked about in the earliest 2000s BC, and then she talked about healthy and go back that far, and then she talked about medical health, and then she talked about well-established medical plan, and then she talked about having knowledge, monitor who people to know, and of course, and then she talked about go back that far, and then she talked about medical earth, well-established medical plan, and then she talked about having knowledge, monitor.
How many times a year is a quarterly journal published?
4.
A lack of which kind of weather causes drought? Dry weather or rainy weather?
Dry weather. Dry weather.
Which is usually considered against the law, the use of illicit drugs or the use of prescription medication?
When would it be safer to take a medication which causes drowsiness? Before sleeping, driving, or operating machinery?
Operating machinery.
Which instrument is used to measure variations in temperature?
Meter.
When you create a table, the data in the horizontal dimension is organized in rows, and the data in the vertical dimension is organized in what?
In the axis.
Where is the natural habitat of animals that are classified as aquatic? In the land, in the sea, or in the sky?
In the plant.
Which of the 5 senses are you using if you detect the odor of gas in the laboratory or in your kitchen?
In the laboratory.
How many people are in a quartet?
12.
How many legs does a biped have?
4. say will upload some insight into the topic through illustration of a number of examples. Individuals being continuous for a long period of time.
coi cái ông đó 11 giờ ông giao nha. Từ từ để đó cho mẹ ấy, để làm rầm rầm mà mẹ không có nghe được. Mẹ tới cái phần listening rồi.
Well, who makes these decisions? In the international arena, the decisions are made by states. But to borrow George Orwell's phrase, some states are more equal than others. The ones who are most equal are the ones called G7, the 7 rich industrial countries. So they have an overwhelming effect on state decisions. And of G7, the one that's far and away the most equal is, of course, the United States, which since the Second World War has had a position of overwhelming international power and no historical precedent to that, and of course has used it to design a world in the interests of powerful sectors within. Alongside the powerful states, there are the institutions that they've designed, the international financial institutions, the IMF and the World Bank, the World Trade Organization, took over from GATT a couple of years ago. Those are institutions of global dominance, global control, which are themselves controlled by the rich countries and primarily by the United States, which once again has an overwhelming influence.
I think we are in the early stages of a change toward much more human freedom in business. And I think this change may be as important for businesses as the change to democracy has been for governments. The reason I think that's happening is because it's now possible for the first time in human history to have the economic benefits of very large organizations, things like economies of scale and knowledge, and at the same time to have the human benefits of small organizations, things like freedom, flexibility, creativity, and motivation. The reason I think that's possible is because information technology has now reduced the cost of communication to such a low level that it's now possible for huge numbers of people, even in very large organizations, to have enough information to make sensible decisions for themselves instead of just following orders from someone above them who supposedly knows more than they do in a management hierarchy.
Why did they do it?
Well, that's very interesting. It's again, it's a source of a lot of debate amongst scholars. It's thought that the Egyptians started the process of mummification to essentially mimic the natural desiccation processes of the desert sands. Egypt is a very dry country. Organic remains such as textiles, bodies, human skin, all sorts of things are very well preserved, and especially the desert is very hot. In ancient times, in the pre-dynastic period of the 4th millennium BC, people were buried in simple pit graves, and so it's thought that the natural desiccating processes of the desert essentially dried the bodies out and preserved them. The Egyptians observed this and sought to imitate that process.
Arjun and Jag were part of the Young Achievement Australia program, which was a good place for them to get their company off the ground. They established investors, applied for patents, and registered the all-important company and product names.
Yeah, the name's actually kind of interesting. Being part of the Young Achievement program, we need to incorporate a Y and an A into the name somehow. That's not really an easy thing to do when somebody says you have to put Y and A together. And we thought, it's Australian, we need something catchy. One guy had mentioned Yabby. Some people maybe people want a professional name, they want Medical Devices Incorporated or something. But, we thought, no, it's got to be catchy. We got to have some character to our product and a bit of style and something that people really remember. Medical Devices Incorporated, we're one in a million. Yabby Jab, we're the sole one.
So between 4000 and 3000 BC, the Mesopotamian, Sumerian cultures do not practice any kind of burial. And then about 3000, in the early dynastic period, these burials start to reappear. And they reappear with a certain amount of conspicuous consumption. And this is the context for the royal burials at war. Okay, so the royal cemetery consists of quite a number of pits. So these are little people. These are the excavation workers who are coming down into the pits. So you get some sense of how really deep and how really difficult it was to construct these chambers.
So, what is quantum mechanics? Even though it was discovered by physicists, it's not a physical theory in the same sense as electromagnetism or general relativity. In the usual hierarchy of sciences, with biology at the top, then chemistry, then physics, then maths, quantum mechanics sits at a level between maths and physics that I don't know a good name for. Basically, quantum mechanics is the operating system that other physical theories run on as application software, with the exception of general relativity, which hasn't yet been successfully ported to this particular OS.
But the way we make choices about, individual choices about when and where we drive, an example of how perfectly reasonable individual choices can turn into a collective disaster. A few years ago, every driver in London took a rational decision based on cost and time and comfort and other factors to climb into a car, drive to work. And that was fine when there were only 3,000 or 30,000 drivers. But when it became 300,000 drivers, people independently making the same perfectly rational decision, we had a result which no individual driver could predict and for which no individual driver could feel responsible, and actually which no reasonable driver would want, because it held them up. We all know that the roads actually would be clear if the people who don't need to drive didn't drive, and that the people who don't need to drive is anybody but me, generally speaking. But the point is, none of the 300,000 who drove during that period is some secret anarchist who wanted to clog up the roads.
Well, I would class it as a wonder drug. Because if you look at the structure of aspirin, the chemical structure is really simple. I mean, a lot of drugs these days are very, very complex. Aspirin is one of the simplest drugs around, and it's also one of the oldest. It probably is, in terms of a synthetic drug, it's the oldest. As I said earlier, it was marketed in 1899, so it's well over 100 years old. But the more people actually study how it works and what it can do, the more amazed people get. And back in the late 90s, even though the drug was 100 years old, there were papers being published every 2 hours on aspirin. And there are something like 30,000 papers on aspirin now. And for a drug that old, that's remarkable.
A 140 years later, watching yet another Hollywood remake of King Kong, I was struck by what a poor choice of monster a giant gorilla makes. Gorillas are, for the most part, peaceful vegetarians who live in remote jungle far from humans. The common urban cat, by contrast, is considerably more ferocious. Unlike gorillas, cats are vicious predators and ruthlessly territorial animals that fight and kill regularly. They also have scary claws. Aside from British comedians The Goodies, however, no one has seriously considered making Kitten Kong movies. For once, Hollywood is not to blame for our irrationality. Gorillas captivate our imaginations because of their obvious similarity to humans. But the origin of our fascination with gorillas as violent monsters can probably be blamed on Charles Darwin.
And in fact, the painting or the image in the lower right-hand corner might look familiar to you, and that's because it would look more familiar if I reversed this line or if you looked at it in a mirror, because that is a line-by-line reproduction of Adam in the creation of Adam from the vault of the Sistine Chapel, painted a couple of years earlier by Michelangelo. And the history of art, of course, is a kind of echo chamber, a hall of mirrors, where painters are echoing one another, reflecting one another, bouncing off one another. There's no such thing as plagiarism in art. If you borrow an image from another painter, art historians call it a quotation.
I think that parents are very worried about the potential danger of their children being stalked and groomed and information otherwise being used inappropriately. It doesn't take very much for a young person to quite innocently be putting their photograph up on some social networking space together with a list of their friends and an agenda of what their week looks like, and someone meaning them no good at all can have access to
I believe the charter movement, now that it's been 11 or 12 years really of open schools in California, is starting to enter a separate phase, what some of my colleagues call and I call phase 2. And that has different components. One is the standards are higher. These charter schools have to be better than they ever were. And what I mean is when I look at the charter schools across the state, and Heather alluded to this, there are some lousy charter schools. There are some average charter schools. And there are some, I submit, great charter schools. And I tend to, and I'm known for this at the Commission as being from kind of the tough love arm of the charter school movement, where I believe the charter schools that are not succeeding, they deserve to be supported for a while, helped, technical assistance, but they do not have a right to exist. And if they're not serving students, and it may not be just the narrow measures of STAR and API, it could be a broader measure. If they're not serving students, they do not deserve.
No, that's an important aspect. As you alluded to earlier, we've previously done work which has proven that in some situations, even people whose blood pressure is not high can benefit from blood pressure lowering therapy. So in this study, the main reason that we included patients was because of diabetes. We didn't care what their blood pressure was, whether it was high or low. And our objective was to see whether or not lowering average or below average blood pressure in diabetics was beneficial. And the results suggested that irrespective of whether your blood pressure was high or low, if you had diabetes, you benefited.
Oh, it's very spooky. First of all, probability by itself is spooky. Let me show you how probability enters the system. You walk past a store window, and you see an image of yourself in the store window. You're straightened apart. You're not so bad, for a man of my age. The guy in the store window who's fooling around with mannequins, he sees you, and you see yourself. What does that mean? A stream of photons from sunlight leaves your face, heads for the store window. Let's consider one of them. It has a choice. It can go right through so that the guy behind the window can see you, or it could be reflected from the store window. Some fraction of them are reflected, some of them go through. What determines that? What determines the future of that photon? And countless such examples teach us that it's random, that it's a throw of the dice. And that's where Einstein made his famous statement, God plays dice with the universe. At every instant of that single object, that quantum object, we have probability. We do not have certainty.
The bank is hoping to tap into a fast-growing market.
The bad weather conditions led to several cancellations.
The main problem is the increase in plagiarism exacerbated by the internet.